All right, and it looks like we are live. Yep, StreamYard says we are live. So say hi, everybody.
Howdy.
All
Hello.
right, so we are all gathered here today for the Dragonlance live show. We are wrapping up this Dragonlance Chronicles read along with Dragons of Spring Dawning, and I have got John, Nico, and Pete, and then we will also be joined by Beth Ann Burning Sokola. I believe I've said that correctly in a little bit. But guys, go ahead and introduce yourselves and your channels.
All right, I'll go first. I'm John. My channel name is Hey Y'all Listen Up, and I've actually kind of been reading Dragonlance for the pretty much the entirety of my channel because I started with Chronicles, went to Legends, did the Raceland Chronicles, and now I'm in the Preludes.
Nice.
Plus, I covered kind of classic fantasy sci-fi, and I'm trying to get into some modern fantasy and sci-fi as well.
Very nice. Are we going clockwise or?
Yeah, Nico, just go ahead and run with it.
Okay, I wasn't sure if he didn't say anything, but
It's fine.
I'm Nico from Nico's Book Reviews. This is I think third time I've been through the whole Chronicles. I read them when I was really young, and then I reread like early last year, and then did the read now. But I actually have not read a ton of other Dragonlance novels. I just a few here and there that were available when I was younger, but I do on my channel all kinds of fantasy, a pretty good mix of older and newer stuff as well.
Hi, I'm Pete. Ponderings of Pete, the thing. That thing. If I can, there we go. Whatever. This
Directions.
is my. This is my first time reading Dragonlance. I did not read it when I was a child. I read other things, and on my channel, we usually talk about like fantasy, sci-fi, just your typical this corner of booktube stuff. Yeah, so I am the non-nostalgia reader for this live show.
And
It's
I
an
mean,
important role.
if you're on my channel, I'm Andrew from Andrew's Wizards Reads. I do sci-fi and fantasy, both classic and new, and also occasionally the smattering of horror. I'm starting to kind of dip my toe in the horror field a little bit more. But yeah, this is very much from my childhood. Like John, I read a lot of Dragonlance when I was a kid. And it hasn't been a part of my channel since I started the channel, but I think I've been talking about it since I started my channel. I don't quite remember. But I had a lot of fond memories and a lot of nostalgia wrapped up in the Dragonlance Chronicles. And yeah. But first of all, let's just get everybody's general thoughts on Spring Dawning, or even the Chronicles as a whole. Open floor.
Well, Spring Dawning's my least favorite of the three, and I can, I read it. I read the Chronicles about a year and a half ago, and then reread it for this, and I can definitely see the weaknesses of the story, and especially the plot. But the character interactions I think are still fairly good. I think they hold up. It's just getting through the story itself.
Yeah, I think I pretty well agree with Spring Dawning. There's, and I assume we'll all talk about it, but there is a pretty big annoying thing that happens with the plot that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and it's just done to get everybody where they need to be. Also, I never liked the sea elves. I don't know if that's unpopular or popular, but I was just waiting, like the stupid sea elves. I was waiting for that to happen.
I actually forgot about them. I completely slipped my mind. Like,
it wasn't in the book nearly as much as I remembered it being. I remembered that being a bigger part, and it really wasn't. So apparently that was just something I was annoyed at for no apparent reason. But this one, though, the character moments do, I think, really help. And there are a couple of really big events that happen that I just really enjoy. And so I feel like it's one of those books where I'm reading through and I'm like, this is fine. And then the big things happen and I'm like, and it just makes me enjoy it more. just because of the characters. So I think with the end of book 2, and one of the things that happens near the end of book 3, there are very strategic events. I'm saying it vaguely because I don't know if we're going full spoilers right off the bat. But
let's give it a few minutes before we go full spoilers. But yeah,
that's what I was
just
say.
general
I think
thoughts
everybody
and
knows
feelings.
what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Hi, I also did not like Spring Dawning the least, despite the structural issues in Autumn Twilight that I was like, oh, that's interesting. I think Tanis is a pile of flaming garbage that doesn't even deserve to be thrown on anybody's porch.
Tell me how you really feel.
That just throwing that out there.
That's fantastic.
So, man, that kind of sums up a lot of things.
I felt like that's a bit harsh on Tanis. I don't like Tanis. I certainly didn't like him as much this read through. I'm also it's my least favorite of the chronicles, the main chronicles, I should say.
To be fair, Tanis does suck in this book.
Yeah, he's
like,
not the best, but like a lot of times he gets caught.
I like Tanis, and he sucks in this book.
Yeah.
Here I am trying to be diplomatic, and everyone's just like, he stinks.
He just kind of is like wild and fleeing one way to the next, and just being self-pitying and not thinking. And it's just, I don't like a lot of things he does in this book. I still like him as a character. I think he's a good character, but.
Yeah, so where we left off in Dragons of, was it Winter Night? Yeah, Winter Night. I always forget the titles of these books. When we left off in Winter Night, yeah, right. But don't ask me to name the seasons either. You'll be sorely disappointed. I felt like there was so much promise at the end of Winter Night. Like, we get a lot of character growth. We get to see Sturm, and basically through his death, we get to really redeem his characterization from Autumn Twilight and things of that nature. We get to see Lorana really blossom, and then we get hit with Spring Dawning. And I mean, overall, like, what was everybody's rating? Because I think I gave it a 3 out of 5.
3.
You gave it a 3?
I think I didn't really determine ratings for the individual books, but the trilogy is a 3 for me after a reread. Last year, I think it was more of a 4, but rereading it again so soon after, I feel like just dipped my opinion a little bit lower. But
not worth your time. That's
ooh. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have John as an ally. I don't think that it holds up in the scope of modern fantasy, but if you are a classic fantasy lover, Dragonlance is still a very readable series, and the core pillar really branches out and expands and does improve, especially when you get away from Wise and Hickman a little bit.
Well, you want to read Chronicles so you can get to Legends.
Yeah.
Because I think Legends is where this series really shines.
Liam's not holding back. Let me know how you really feel, Himvar.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was surprised because, like I said, I read this early last year, and I read it before I was like super active on book 2. I'm pretty sure I posted a video, but it would have been like an old audio only video and everything. And I don't remember anything I said in it, but I remember still liking it, thinking it held up pretty well. But I also was like reading it, and like that the nostalgia was really, really strong. I feel like I was a lot more objective reading it this time because I'd already kind of gotten the nostalgia reread done not terribly long ago. And so I definitely noticed a lot more flaws, but I do think, keeping in mind that, like, this was something pretty new at the time. It was the first time Weiss and Hickman ever worked together. They were really basing it more with the early books on having it be very Dungeons and Dragons-y. And so I think for what it is, it tells a good story. It has good characters. And I still like some of the themes and the things that they do, where it's not just as easy as good versus evil. There is a lot more to that. And so I still like a lot of aspects of this. So I wouldn't say like it's not worth your time. I think this is one of those things you have to understand what you're reading it probably is something that is better for people who are looking for something to like kind of start getting into fantasy and they want something a little bit simpler and easier. But I still think I don't think this is bad. I would say I still think it's good. It does what it's wanting to do. It's definitely flawed though, and
Yeah.
it has not aged the best in some ways. But it's some of that might still be nostalgia talking because this is some of the earliest fantasy I read. But I still think it does a good job of kind of setting that baseline with simpler fantasy.
Well, just so that we're not trashing on the book the entire time, why don't we talk about some of our favorite moments, characters, scenes, what have you, so we can kind of get going in a little positive direction before we tip back down and start trashing this.
I'm just laughing at the rain will cover your tears from the Tanis hate. We the comments. Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah, well, some of my favorite moments are when Caramon was telling about how he would make shadow puppets of rabbits with Raceland when he was young, and that scene will come up in another book as well. Um, One of my favorite scenes is when Gold Moon kind of goes back to the first uh, book and tells Tanis why he is the leader, because Tanis is in full whine mode about why everyone's, and Goldmoon's like, hey, when it hit the fan, you were the one that stood up and had a plan of action, and then we followed your plan of action, and we made it to here.
Honestly, one of my favorite moments is Barham, when we get Barham's backstory. Not only is it kind of haunting, but it's a surprisingly dark moment. Other than one other scene that happens later in the book, which gets me every time. But yeah, when we learned about like Barham and the Green Gemstone and how it got to be there, and like how this is all kind of his fault. It really kind of drives it home that even an innocent mistake can have just terrible ramifications, and how greed kind of sucks.
Yeah, so with Barham, I don't know. Like, I like what's done with him here, but he felt so random in the other books. So I've always been kind of on the fence with Barham and his parts. But Spring Dawning, the thing that I don't look forward to reading it, but the Flint stuff are some of my favorite scenes.
I love Flint.
When I was rereading this for the first time too, I didn't remember a lot, but as I started getting to the scenes where it was becoming more and more obvious what was going to happen, I was just like, oh no, and it started all coming back to me. And the way that's handled, and the way that it's handled at the end of this book, and then other stuff that happens in a later book that just continues it, I really, really enjoyed the way that was done. Because it's just Flint and Tasselhoff, their interactions are always some of my absolute favorite. So I still really, really enjoyed a lot of those scenes.
Man, Flint, like as he keeps like massaging that arm and he keeps getting winded, and you're just like, no, Flint, no.
The foreshadowing is a little bit heavy-handed in this novel.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but
I mean, they make it really obvious, but
I kind of appreciate it because at the same time you get to see Flint keep the secret. Like, you as the reader know it's coming, but then you get it. I don't know if it would work today in modern writing because it is very heavy-handed, like John said. But at the same time, like, you get to kind of watch, like, he knows it's coming. Like, he's in denial and he knows, but you really get to see him hide it from everybody. And like people know something's wrong. But at the same time, like, he's just stalwart. He is stubborn. He is just this old root of a dwarf. And I just love the scene because even though you know it's coming, even when it happens, you just get that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach anyway. At least I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something I've noticed too. With Dragonlance does it, and a lot of just older 80s type fantasy, you didn't have as much, like, it wasn't about twists or anything. It was like you'll have chapter titles that literally, like, if the characters are gonna be trapped, the title's called The Trap. If there's gonna be a battle, it's called The Battle. You know, they a lot of stuff was done like that, which hello.
A wild Beth Ann has appeared.
But it doesn't fit well with like modern fantasy, and it's always kind of annoying me. But like you also get a lot of the older books, like Why Isn't It Fun and other things. It'll start with like a scene toward the end of the book to like try to get you excited or something, and so it's just kind of part of it comes down to a different approach, and that's where I think with a lot of things they aren't trying to do it. Like if they were trying to do something and like foreshadow it that heavy-handedly and then act like you weren't supposed to know, that would be really different. I think they're acknowledging like we're gonna, make it very clear what's gonna happen, so that you're in on it. So it doesn't bother me as much when it's done that way, even if it's a bit heavy-handed. As long as you're not trying to be like, I bet you didn't know this was gonna happen, despite me basically literally telling you. That's when I get annoyed.
We're talking favorite moments right now, Beth Ann. Favorite characters, moments, characters, what have you. I think I just said characters twice. These things happen.
We're talking about characters, just for the record, too. I don't know if Andrew mentioned that.
Yeah.
Just a hint. I don't know. That sounded like a complaint rather than a favorite moment.
Well, we're kind of discussing the merits of how Flint's
sense.
death is handled.
It's also quite different, I think. It's the way he died was not like typical for your fantasy book, and I was like, oh, that's nice. That was a nice thing to see, that like, oh yeah, it was heavy hitting, but also it's like it's different. It's not, oh, you have this impending sense of doom and then he gets stabbed in the gut.
Yeah.
No, like his malady actually takes him, but then we also have to deal with the fact that Tanis just flies into a rage and just stabs him straight through the chest. Yeah, I can see Pete just is not having it.
Oh, but yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like it made it pretty obvious that at some point Flint was probably going to die of a heart attack. But I agree, you'd probably have modern fantasy have something like that, and then just have it happen like, oh, and they get stabbed or something in general. But that's why you knew it was happening, but it fit the character so well. So that's where I was complaining about some books. They do the heavy foreshadowing and then act like you're not supposed to have figured it out, even though it was obvious. They didn't do this. Like there were all of the notes about his bad heart, basically, and him not wanting to admit it. And even as far as like the first book, he was talking about how he just didn't want to admit he was old and really couldn't keep up on the adventures. So it was the perfect end for his character. That's how he goes out. Is he's still trying, and he just finally got too tired and needed the rest. And I've always loved that scene and the additions at the end with like him waiting at the tree and like yelling at everybody who comes by because he's waiting for the stupid Kender to come and keep him company, even though he doesn't like him and he's annoying. It's just like, oh man, it gets the heartstrings. It does.
I think Flint might be the most like fully fleshed character.
Yeah, Flint's my favorite.
So well
I mean,
done.
Flint and Tasselhoff is magic, but Flint by himself, I think, is the most well-rounded character. He's the most consistent through the trilogy as well. Because most people think Sturm has a big stick up his bum in the first book. And then, in Winter Night,
I think that's
he's
a
awesome.
known fact. I don't think there's any people think.
Yeah.
But so like I think Tasselhoff is consistent, but Tasselhoff can also get a bit annoying at times. Even though I think it's fun. I'm also a highly annoying and energetic person, so I'm just identifying with my kind. But let's back up a little bit, since Beth Ann, you're a bit on the late side. What was your like? No, it's fine. You messaged me. I let everybody know.
Okay.
What was your general feeling and thoughts and rating of the book?
Yeah. I don't know. I sort of want to pass on the rating because I have so much nostalgia with these books, right? I know we've talked about this in the previous live show, but like reading them as an adult, part of my brain is like, this is just bad. But part of my brain is still like, this is still the most amazing thing I've ever read. Which is
nostalgia is a hell of a drug.
Yeah, I give myself over here. Well, and this book has always not been my favorite. I think in this trilogy, the second book is my favorite. I just really love what happens with Sturm and Lorana in the second book. So all of that to say, I think I might give this one like a 4-star, but freely acknowledging that the nostalgia is bumping that up. Like if I were reading this for the first time as an adult, I think it would be like a 3.5. Because I do think the characterizations, like they write strong characters. And so that definitely is worth recognizing. But the thing, when I first came in, and Nico, you were talking about the battles. So one part that just drove me crazy in this reread was the complete glossing over of Lorana becoming the amazing Golden General. It's like one page, we get some really cool character development where we see her internal monologue as she's sort of assigned that role. But then it's like, the next page, all of a sudden she's won 1,000,000 battles and they've turned the tide and she's like the greatest, general ever. And I'm like, wait a second,
That good old time skip.
Yeah, that time skip really.
That's definitely something I have complaints about. They do that a lot, where they just, something happened, and a lot of it is baiting for new books. Where they're like, oh, if you want to see what happened at Icewall, you'll have to read this later book, basically. Or I don't know if there's like a middle book that talks more about that with it. But the one that got me, so sorry to go back to a complaint, but the most flagrant advertising with a fourth wall break in this book is when Gilthanas and Silvara come back from Sanction, and they just keep going on like, oh my gosh, we couldn't possibly tell you the story. We're so weary, but I'll tell you this. And I can't dare name the person who helped us because they're in danger. And just going on. And then like this is being narrated by, I can't remember, Athanas, something like that, the librarian. But the librarian who sees all. And then it even mentions like there was a footnote saying that you can read about this tale in one of his further chronicles. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? We're really doing that right now? Come on.
Go buy it. Yeah.
That was a bit much.
And we didn't even get an epic poem. Like that's one of the nice things in the second book is when they do that, they gloss over the whole Icewall thing, but they at least give us an epic poem summarizing it, right? And how hard would it have been to do that for the Gilthanas Silvara journey and for just some of these battles of Lorana becoming an amazing general? Like you could have just given us a 2-page poem and I would have been a lot happier. And I'm noticing in the chat, Brendan saying not showing Lorana in command was a big failing, and then Lorana just goes downhill. And like I think the sort of reversal in her character that we see later would have been more palatable.
Oh, we'll get to it.
Seen more of her being,
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, but like that would be more palatable if we'd had more screen time of her being the new version of Lorana, right before she goes back to the beta. So,
right,
yeah.
Yeah, just cut Lorana from this entire novel, and I think you'd improve it.
Yeah. Can we just cut everyone except Flint and Tass?
I'd read that adventure. Pete, I know you didn't like the book. 2 out of 5. Ooh. Is there anything that you liked? Any particular scene, character? I'm just gonna prod you. Just poke.
I think Flint's demise was nice. I think a standout character is finally Raceland for me, because I think the conclusion of his story actually, like in the other books, it was like, oh my gosh, his conclusion is gonna be so, and it's so much build up, and it's like purposely edgy build up that's slightly irritating. But the conclusion of it, while expected, was actually pretty nice, and to see that like he was the pivotal point and all that stuff, that was really cool. And then Caramon's kind of struggle with letting him go was pretty nice.
Oh, I forgot about that. I got so mad. I think I messaged somebody and I was complaining about that at the end. But yeah. What I think is what I think is cool about Raceland is like, even though like it's kind of jarring where he just vanishes and then like shows up in Palthanas, I think is where he ends up, and then like he shows up later again. I think there's a whole book. Does Hourglass Mage fill in that time gap, John? I forget.
I've not read the Lost Chronicles.
Okay,
but I think it is Hourglass Mage that covers
How
the
he-
time period between books 2 and 3. I actually think both the second and third cover between books 2 and 3 of the Chronicles, but I'm not 100% sure because I've not read the Lost Chronicles yet.
Yeah, I'd almost say that you need to read Lost Chronicles interspersed between the Chronicles because it really fleshes out the story and makes it flow a little bit better. But at the same time, like it's kind of odd. Like I would almost like them to like go back in, cut up all 6 books, and make it like a more cohesive story, just so that it would flow better and feel like a fully fleshed out adventure, rather than like, oh hey, we did this adventure, and I'm jumping back to Winter Night where we went and found this hammer. Yeah, if you want to read that story, don't worry, wait 20 years and we'll write the book. And so, yeah, but like with Raceland, he really gets fleshed out. Like knowing his backstory more and what happened between him and Cameron kind of makes a lot more sense. Like it's a very unhealthy relationship that they have. Very much one of codependence, and it's very, very toxic. But it's great to finally see Raceland to where he's just standing on his own instead of constantly having to lean and cough and hack and just grumble and drink his disgusting tea. You get to kind of see him stand up and be like a whole person.
Yeah, I really like that evolution for the twins. I liked Raceland's particular arc more in high school than I do now, because now I'm just sort of over the evil tropes and the like power grabbing trope. But I still like him. But yeah, just in general, that arc of you have this really toxic codependent relationship and sort of maturing for both of the characters, and Caramon in particular ends up in a really good place at the end of this season with really being able to be independent and like achieve these other things that he never could have dreamed of when he was closer with his brother. So like getting involved with Tika and stuff like that. I've always liked that story arc for him.
Yeah. And I think it's just with a lot of the things here, they did a lot of things the way they did to sell more books because they wanted to write more books. I don't know if that was their choice or if that was the publisher that's like, make sure you put as many things here to crank out as many more books as we can. And that was just kind of the thing, you know, with Dragonlance, with Forgotten Realms, I feel like they wanted to push out as many, and so you get some that are probably really good, some that probably aren't. And so I think they really did that a lot with this, though, where they were trying to. It was almost like the entire point of the Chronicles, in a way, was to like set up the Dragonlance universe. And so there's definitely some things that they did, but it's where, like I said, it's flawed, but I do like a lot of the characters. I like, for the most part, where the characters end up. And so even though I have a lot of issues with this third book too, I do like the ending for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now it's time to talk about what we didn't like. And I'm going to start off. Well, now we're going full spoilers, just trashing the book, basically. Well, not trashing the book, but you know what I mean. I'm going to start with, because I know everybody's going to jump on Lorana. I am actually going to mention Fizbin. Now, I liked the whole, like, Fizbin taking Flint out into the middle and then them disappearing in the constellation. I loved all that. I hated the fact that he jumps on a dragon and shoots them out of the sky just to make it a harder journey for them. I despise that. Like, if you are in fact a god, what the crap are you doing shooting at heroes out of the sky and then acting all confused about it when you've really just done wrecked them? I'm not going to swear, but like, I was so angry at that. Like, don't get me wrong, it was funny to have the senile dragon, and I always enjoy seeing a silly Fizbin, but that was moronic. Like, there was no call for it.
It's called Spot the Dungeon Master.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Where's Waldo?
I mean, yeah, that's definitely, you know, they posed it as basically he wanted them to go the way he wanted them to go. And
yeah, that's called railroading, sir, and I don't appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally what it is. That's just like, He's like, oh, they're not doing the thing I want, so I'm going to create a situation where I force them to do the thing I want. But what annoyed me more about that whole scene, though, because this repeatedly got brought up, and it was really making me angry, is at that point. So, like last we had seen them, they were leaving Kalamon on foot, and then all of a sudden they have this whole fleshed out plan with the dragons. They have dragon army armor. So it was just another thing where we gloss over the details, and it's just like Dungeon Master's setting a new scene. But they repeatedly said they were on their way to Kalamon. And I'm like, no, you aren't. You left Kalamon. You're on your way to Naraka. But they time and time again kept saying on our way to Kalamon, or, you know, they were interrupted on their way to Kalamon, or when they only needed the dragon army armor to get into Kalamon. And I'm like, no, it's not Kalamon. It's like, it really, really got me. It's just happened so many times. And that's what I was really annoyed about it. Because it's just such an obvious oversight. And there are several other times throughout the series where there were editing issues like that occasionally, where they would say the wrong place. But this was the most egregious for me.
I think the other one that really annoyed me was just Lorana. Like, the other thing that seemed like railroading was Lorana purposely falling into the trap and getting kidnapped. Oh my.
It wasn't even a good trap.
No.
And when literally everybody says, this is a trap. And me and Nico were talking about this again last night on Voxer. But like, and I think I ranted for 5 minutes about it. But 6 minutes, excuse me. But what really got me was the fact that if we are going to say that she is this golden lady and she's won all of these battles, that means she has some sort of statistical acumen. She has some sort of brains for battle. And so if you come to me and say, hey, your lover, you know, the one that left you? Yeah, he's dying. Would you like to go to him? The only cost is that you have to leave your armies and give yourself into our hands. No, he's dying. And and like literally, if he's dying, like, sorry, any good general is going to be like, okay, listen, you've killed my lover. I'll decimate your armies, and then I'll take his body from you. But no, and she's just like, nope, I'm just gonna prance and literally skip, hop, and jump into your clutches, and just so that we can have a part 3 of the story.
And so, while I do largely agree, and I brought up what they literally could have done to completely take that out of the equation and have the story end up the same way, is have Kitiara actually capture the Green Gemstone Man, Barum, and like capture him, and then go to Naraka, and they're like, we have to go save him and stop her from winning. Like, they could have done that and had it work pretty much the same way. But I will say, so because Brendan has some very impassioned comments in defense of Lorana in the comment section here, so I will play two kind of devil's advocate, and because I do see where it was going, the things I'll notice. To be fair, they do set up that Lorana, even though she is the general, that she very much is doubting herself and feels like she's being given credit for things that she didn't fully do because others were involved. And things like that. So we do kind of see that where she's doubting herself. It is established with Gilthanos as well that elves just basically believe that people will keep their word. They don't really have the concept of just like you make a vow and don't keep it, which is silly in my opinion. But you know, it is established that that's a thing. So she does seem to really believe that Kitiara is being truthful. To an extent, and that was the whole plan, you know, Kitiara with saying it. Plus, it's mentioned also that Kitiara was fleeing and losing on purpose to an extent too. So maybe Lorana wasn't as good as a general. Granted, later Kitiara straight up says she was a good general. So it's once again like I feel like you can make an argument, but it starts to collapse a little bit, which is things they do later. But
the fate of the literal world was at stake, and he was already dying.
Yeah,
Supposedly.
and then there's just the expectation that they kidnap her, so everyone's gonna surrender, and I'm just like, really? Like, I know she was your leader, but like that's not like the whole world. Even though only really the knights and some other soldiers were specifically following her, the whole world's just gonna surrender now because I mean, that's just where it was too much. They were pushing it too hard, and I think that's why it was an issue. They could have done it better, but it was just too much of a stretch for me.
And the thing that really irritates me is like, okay, she's a general. She's not. She had, you know, what you said. She has like some strategic smarts here. Why doesn't she, you know, tell somebody that this is happening and be like, all right, I'm gonna go do this, and I trust her to keep her word, but like, I need to have a backup plan. Like that's one part of the things with like being a general is you have to be adaptable to your situations. And I get like what Brendan's saying about, okay, Kittyara kept her word on, or Kittyara didn't kill her on the High Claris Tower, but she's obviously did that in order to manipulate her, and be like, oh, he's on my side. We're canoodling on the side now, haha. And that in and of itself didn't even like. That's the frustrating part. Is at the end of Winter's Night, she didn't like. That didn't put any sense of betrayal in Lorana that lasted whatsoever. Like, okay, why do I like he's dying, but he's also yours now, and now you're saying he wants to see me and he's not like. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me the thing that annoys me about that whole sequence, like I think Brendan is totally right. Like everything that Lorana does is reasonable. You know, like she's a person. Like I can understand the feelings that drive her, but the lack of sort of any thought that goes into it. And in this most recent reread, I did notice more than I have on previous reads of this book, what somebody already mentioned about how she's questioning her role and she feels like she's a figurehead and a political piece that the knights put in place. And reading it when I was younger, I'd sort of glossed over that part. And now I just wish they'd fleshed it out a bit more, of like fleshed out some of the doubts and fears that she was feeling in her role. Because I think if that had just been like fleshed out a little bit more, her like snap decision that like, well, obviously I'm going to leave this situation and go try to be with Tanis would make more sense to me. Like I would feel a bit more empathetic towards it. But just how quickly everything happens and how little Lorana seems to think about it just feels, that's what feels sort of not quite believable to me, I guess. But I think the pieces are there. It's just that Weiss and Hickman didn't quite like flesh them out or connect them in ways that are really convincing.
It almost feels like we've gone back to Autumn Twilight and that Lorana nat one to a wisdom check.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and she was just like, yep. Like they handed her a piece of paper that said, "This is not a trap, I promise." And then like people goes, "No, that's a trap." And she just was like, "No, it says right here on the paper, this isn't a trap." Like, yeah, no, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
It felt, I think the main problem is it feels forced. It feels incredibly contrived to put her in a situation that we then have to result to part 3 of the book, specifically just because of this one choice. And like, who brought it up? Somebody said, why didn't you at least tell somebody? Instead, they were like, no, let's keep this on the down low. Don't worry. We're going to sneak out of the city so nobody knows where. Like, it's willfully negligent on her behalf. Like, to the point of, like, it's something I'd do if I was 8 years old and I wanted to go get some ice cream down the street. And I'm lactose intolerant and my parents don't let me have that. Like, that's what it felt like.
What example there.
I don't know. Like, I felt like I should have a reason why your parents don't want you to have ice cream.
I mean, yeah, lactose intolerant, and then for some odd reason you want the ice cream that nobody wants. I don't know. I would say pistachio, but I like pistachio ice cream.
I like pistachio ice cream.
Right? Yeah. It's so
Anyway, how did we get on pistachio ice cream?
I said ice cream, and I had to mention pistachio.
Another issue that I had is, again, we're going to come back to Tanis. Is literally like he does the same thing he did in Winter Night, where he just walks into the camp and he's like, "Don't worry, I'm yours." And it's just like, "You want to bang? Like, we'll be okay." And she's like, "You're clearly lying to me. I know." And it's I don't know. Like the first time in Winter Night, it was believable to the point of like, "Hey, you're wearing my armor," like it was a genuine mistake. Which felt weird because nobody decided to investigate it.
Mm-hmm.
And then like here, like he's clearly a spy, and she's just like,
Well-
you know what, you're pretty good in bed. I'm gonna make this bargain with you, and it was just like,
I feel like you're overlooking some of the explanation there, because Kitty I did clearly see, she's even like, Tannis, like, why are you here? Like, obviously, you're not really like what you're saying. And she kind of knows that, and so she tries to like bargain with him to be at her side. And plus you do have Lord Soth comments, which just for the fact, Death Knights, super cool. We haven't talked about Death Knights yet, but I love that concept so much, and I could have dealt with more Death Knights. I feel like I remembered there being more Death Knight activity than there was. Anyway, though, he's very specifically commented several times that as much power as she had, he would still be a master over her, because basically she really did love him and truthfully didn't want to hurt him, no matter how much she pretended she didn't care. So I do feel like her taking him, it did make sense with the story. I think she wanted him, and she was jealous of Lorana, and she wanted to somehow like force him to love her. And also it's implied as well that Raistlin was somewhat involved with the decisions because of the fact that it was set up for Tannis to kill Arrakis. So I wonder if Raistlin had been in contact with her at all or anything. It's not really stated, but that's one of those things. Like, you can, like, the mind can play the mental gymnastics and find reasons for a lot of things, but they don't always do the best explaining things super well.
yeah, I don't remember. I feel like I've read Hourglass Major. I feel like Kitty did know Raistlin was in the camp.
It seems like it's implied. Like, it's never really stated.
It's
but
very much heavily implied.
Yeah, can we talk about how quickly Raistlin like became trusted by all these evil people? It's like, you're literally evil. You're not supposed to trust anybody, and you're always talking about not trusting each other and backstabbing. And then all of a sudden, Raistlin, who has his own inscrutable motives and everybody knows it, is like everybody's best buddy on the evil side. That happened over like a month.
Well,
yeah.
It did. I was gonna say it didn't. I'm not sure exactly how much time passed, but he basically like agreed to join the Dark Queen when they were on Sylvanesti.
Yeah, that's true.
So there had been some time there.
That's several months, but still months.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that's where it's the evil will always fall in upon itself type thing, which is used very strongly here.
Mm-hmm.
Which I will say too, because that's something that is always, it's just a trope that basically it doesn't really matter if the good guys actually succeed. Evil is gonna fail because it's evil, and that was a trope they used pretty hard. Although in the follow-up, they do turn that on its head in a really fun way. So I will say that, which I enjoyed whenever.
Yeah.
I kind of wished it would have been more. I wished that the actions of the heroes would have mattered more. I mean, yeah, you have Tannis killing Arrakis, but other than that, like that, evil eating evil basically nullified all the actions of everybody else. Like, I wish we could have had like a great battle with Lorana at the head of the army and doing some cool stuff there. Because I felt like that's what they were kind of building the expectation for in the first part. But then,
well, and that comes back to my issues with Barum, because I just feel like instead of getting to see the party, like have the final confrontation, they just are on a mission to transport the NPC to the end of the scene so he can, win for them. And so that was why with Barum, I just felt like he wasn't really brought up a whole lot in the first two books. It was a very, very minor, and then all of a sudden he is just absolutely vital in the third book. And
mentioned once in both books.
Well, and that was when I started joining you guys for live streams, I didn't reread the first book. I started with book 2, and they mentioned him, and I'm like, what?
Who's
was
that
he
guy?
even brought up in the first book? And I had to like really think about it because I'd forgotten.
Once,
and it's just and I remember, of course, him being later, but it's just the way that's handled, where he's They do technically mention him, but he's obviously not like relevant to any of the story. And then all of a sudden, he's the key to everything. I don't really like that.
So one of the scenes that I think we can really kind of tear apart and get into the meat of it is basically the end scene where Arrakis dies and stuff like that. But there's also like the flight. I'm trying to remember the word for it. The flight through like the crumbling temple and all that, and then like the departures and the goodbyes and everything. But for me, the more we talk about the book, the more I remember it because I read it last month. Last month? I don't know. It's been a while. But I remember talking, I believe it was to you, Nico. I remember doing a lot of Voxer messages over this with somebody. It feels like it's a very tiny platform where Kitiara, Tanis, and Lorana are all standing. And literally the entire time, Tanis and Kitiara are just whispering back and forth. She's an elf. She's got good ears. Did I do this with you, Pete, or was it with Nico? Because you just started laughing.
Yeah, I think it was me because we were ranting like at the end of August. I think it was.
Okay, so it might have been with Pete, but like I was just like, how, like, because Lorana straight up shoves him off the platform, and then like holds a sword at him, and then like runs away. And she's like, "Meh!" and like flies through the temple. When like you're surrounded by enemies and she just running around, and I was just like, how did she not hear that he was trying to bargain for her life? And like she just acts like it felt weird for me because I always associate elves with great hearing, great sight. I think of a very Tolkien-esque elf. And then she just kind of shoves him like a petulant child, and she's like, "No, you slept with somebody else. Don't try and save me." And like, I'd rather die. That's what it felt like to me personally.
I don't know. I sort of get it. I'd be pretty pissed off if the guy I loved was trying to negotiate with the woman he'd been sleeping with, like, over me. I'd sort of be like, I'm my own woman, dude. Like,
but this is the man that you just literally walked away from an entire army to go hold as he supposedly died, which is part of my argument for then, like, if she loved him so much and she was willing to lose this entire war and crumple all of these armies and walk into an obvious trap, why are you then gonna go ahead and do this?
And that's where too it seems to kind of flip flop because like the whole I'm gonna just walk into the trap thing annoyed me, and that annoyed me. I did like the ending where she's like, "Look, okay, we both obviously love each other, but we both come at this in the wrong way. We're not ready to do anything. Maybe later." And I actually liked that because I thought that started to fit more her development. But yeah, it's just like my bigger problem with the platform is like it sometimes they're yelling. Like Tanis straight up yells at some things. I'm like, can nobody else hear them? Like they're literally talking about their plans in front of the Dark Queen, and she just sits quietly and just lets them. So that kind of got me. But yeah, the I'll save myself. Whoosh, I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need no man. And then just running away from him too. It's just like it seemed kind of cheesy to me.
With thousands of draconians.
Yeah,
you're surrounded.
Tanis should have died.
Run away.
Tanis deserved to die in that scene. Like seriously.
I don't think they were ever going to
kill off Tanis.
Kill Tanis.
So
John, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, part of this is, I have been reading the annotated version. So, I have been kind of spoiled by the annotated version. So, like, Hickman admits that Lorana running after Tanis falling into the trap was a mistake on his part. And Weiss actually tried to talk him out of it because, Weiss had kind of, this was a point where Lorana needed to separate from the group to move the plot along. And Hickman was like, no, she's, in love, and love conquers all. And it was like, it was really, according to the notes, it was their first serious disagreement about the plotting of the novel. So some of the other things I didn't really, notice, like Lorana running off. I mean, didn't really pay that close attention to it. It's just, to me, it's unbelievable that Lorana would have ever become the general in the first place. And if she was the general, she would not have made the decision that she made. You know, had she been a good leader, she would have insisted on, you know, a prisoner trade is fine and dandy, but she would not have done a secret prisoner trade. You know, it would have been in full view of both armies. Um, the second Tanis was not there, she should have booked it. Like, because, you know, here again, in order to fall into the trap, you know, Tanis was not present. And Brendan actually, you know, Liam was asking for an essay defending Lorana. I've done a discussion on Spring Dawning, and Brendan wrote a very long essay defending Lorana, and he does make some good points in that comment.
Oh, cool.
But here again, you know, look, first of all, I don't think the Solamnic Knights would have accepted the leadership of someone outside of their organization. Not at all. And Lorana just never had the training that she needed to become a general. Now, had she actually been a figurehead general, and you know the plot actually kind of made her look like a figurehead general, maybe some of this would have made a lot more sense. They actually show her, you know, actually leading the troops, making plans, and, you know, trying to, you know, actually showing her as the actual general.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It would have worked a little better if she had been a figurehead. Again, reading is all very subjective. And so I can see a lot of people liking Lorana. It felt like, and the easiest way to come at it is we got Lorana from Autumn Twilight. She in Autumn Twilight? Yes, she was in Autumn Twilight. We then get a lot of that character growth where she goes from kind of a childish figure to a little bit of a leader, and she starts breaking out in Winter Night to the point where she's, you know, leading from the front at the Claris Tower. And so then you would naturally expect her progression to continue forward. And I don't mind a couple hiccups now and then from a character. People make mistakes. But it also needs to be said that Lorana is in her 90s. Now, it's young for an elf, but she is still in her 90s.
Well, you got to think of Lorana as a teenage girl, because in I think in Winter's Night it says that she is not yet of age, because they're talking about ownership of the dragon orb.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember who, but I think it was her father says, you know, she's not yet of age, so that dragon orb belongs to me.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to think of Lorana as 16 or 17 years old in human terms.
And I'm aware of that. It's a hard thing to look past when somebody is in their 90s. Like, it's really hard to look. Like, you've got to have some life experience, even if by elf standards, by human standards, like, you're very, very old and very wise. So I can see the argument both ways. And I will even concede the point. But like, it doesn't feel like her character has a smooth arc. It feels like she's on the rise and then she just plummets for the sake of the story. I could have understood a hiccup, a dip. And like you said, from a tactics standpoint, that decision just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think that's where I was kind of getting at earlier too, is I can see both sides, but there's just so many conflicting things because, like John pointed out, her all of a sudden being a general doesn't really make a lot of sense because, you know, I can see her, you know, having a leadership role, but she's never had any sort of experience that would prepare her for running an army of people or strategy or any of that kind of thing. So, and you know, it comes back to the trope of just like the hero just stepping in and magically knowing how to be a good general, which not the most realistic, especially with her being young for the sake of being an elf. And she did live with the elves for almost her entire life before this adventure, so she would have been treated as basically a child at that point as well, I imagine. And so, but then like, okay, but if I believe that she was actually a good general, then her decisions after that don't make a whole lot of sense. So it's kind of like I can only see her as being young and naive, or also being this like super good general who's become wise beyond her years. Just like that's where it kind of starts conflicting and it gets a little tough for me because I could see either side, but we get some conflicting information, I think, to me.
Well, and with her becoming the general, like Brendan's pointing out in the chat, like some of the cool things that she did that showed leadership before she was made general, but the knights didn't see those things. And so, and we're also given a pretty clear framework in these books for the patriarchy, to bring in the P word. But, you know, we're told about how she's still part of her father's house, how she's not considered an adult. We're given some of the sexism within the elven kingdoms and within the human world, right? And so the idea that like these knights would just start answering to this young woman who's placed above them on essentially like 1 or 2 letters describing her previous leadership experience is sort of unbelievable to me, given that cultural setup that we are given in the book. So that's the piece that trips me up with her being made general. But I also do think it is like, it's a strategically good move to make an outsider a leader sometimes when you are plagued by infighting, which is what we know about everything in the Knights. So I think like, you know, there's some ways in which it makes sense, but yeah, there's also some ways that it doesn't make sense even within the world that they've created. And also, Brendan, I'm not completely convinced that they do know everything she did at the High Clerist's Tower. Like, yes, she came up with the plan, but she was also relying on like Sturm as leader of the Knights to help communicate it to the Knights. So there was like, we were seeing the beginning of all of that leadership, and it was really awesome. But you're also talking about only a handful of knights in a remote outpost somehow convincing their leadership back in the hometown. Like, it's just not quite, it doesn't quite convince me, I guess, that would be like really enough evidence for all of the knights to sort of accept her leadership.
Well, to be fair, Beth Ann, by the time that they get to that point, like, you know, most of the knights got decimated in that foolhardy raid that they made earlier. So there's 50 knights left. And those 50 knights were the ones that followed Sturm, and they're in the tower. And then there's there's probably only a handful of leaders that were not in the tower. And I don't think they said exactly how many knights were outside of the tower, but I think most of the knights were there.
I think they referenced there only being like maybe 100 knights left in total or something in Spring Dawning, I think it was. But
yeah,
what it goes back to, though, them making her the leader is just a figurehead does make sense. And that's kind of what's presented. But then we're also told that she was also actually in charge and leading them as a general. So it's just where it kind of goes back and forth. Like, I mean, I could definitely buy them making her as a figurehead. Then you could have used that to be like, she's so frustrated that she's in charge, but they're not really letting her run things. And maybe like the war's going worse. And then so when she hears about Tanis, she's like, oh my gosh, they don't actually need me. I'm just a figurehead. I'm going to go save the man I love. Like, that would have worked, I think, a lot better. It would have given more reason. And that's just where we just keep getting those conflicting ideas. And that's kind of what's tough. And I wonder if some of that is because, John, you brought up that Margaret and Tracy really disagreed on her direction. I wonder if that's where some of that comes from. One of them kept leaning one way, the other a different way or something. And maybe that's why the character just kind of feels off in this book, because it's just the conflicting ideas.
Not only was she given control of the knights, which if she was given control of the knights, that's great. That's 100 warriors. That's not outside the realm of possibility. If I'm going to play devil's advocate and side with Brendan here. However, they then show up and then the entire city hands over its garrisons to her. And that's where it starts to stretch the belief for me. Where like they're just the city should have just gone, no idea who you are. I've got nothing but hearsay that, and I mean, yeah, even if she stood up to Kitiara, like that's one event, and then I actually don't even remember who Bakaris is.
Bakaris is the dragon rider that didn't they capture at the High Clerist's? No, it wasn't High Clerist's Tower. It was probably a little bit later, but that was the prisoner that they exchanged.
Right. I just don't remember his significance. I just remember him as Sir Rapes a lot.
Yeah, well, he was a commander, and he was the one who brought back the heads of the knights, the High Clare's
okay.
tower, and Lorana shot him, and all that.
So 2 acts of bravery do not make a general. I will say that. It takes experience. It takes years. But I mean, we could argue this point all day or discuss it and pull it apart. But I mean, in the end, like if the authors were facing, per the annotated edition, some sort of authorial dissidence where they just weren't getting along and weren't agreeing on where the story should go, I think that does show in the text.
I think the fact that she was made general makes sense to me, honestly. I think that we're dealing with epic fantasy like this. There is the trope of, the leader is the person that is the most, is somebody who's done acts of bravery. Like the elevation of people due to acts of bravery is a trope. I don't think it has a name, but that is a fantasy, specifically epic fantasy trope. If you look at, there's background behind this one, but like with Aragorn, in Return of the King, where he comes and he saves the day, and that in and of is one event that helps to elevate him in the eyes of the Gondor, because he comes and he saves the day. He's also supposed to be their king, but the leader coming in to save the day and them being elevated in the eyes of the people to the point of leadership, of formal leadership, is a trope I think that is consistent throughout epic fantasy, and that's kind of what they were playing into here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense.
To me, it feels unearned because you can contrast Lorana with Kit, because Kit earned her leadership in the Dragon High Army. I mean, especially if you look at other books, but even in the Chronicles, you can tell she actually worked to get to the top, whereas Lorana just kind of shoots up to the top.
Yeah. Overall, I think it just as a plot point, it's a very is the divisive the word I'm looking for? Yeah, it'll either work for you or it won't work for you. I think we've talked a lot about Lorana. Is there anything else we want to touch on before we kind of move into just final thoughts?
I'm trying to think of what I haven't brought up yet, but I keep wanting to talk about something that happens in Summer Flame, but I'm not going to. So it really brought it to the forefront of my mind after finishing this.
I do want to touch on something Pete said earlier about how the action in this kind of seems it unfolds rather than our heroes earning it, and especially on this reread. And this is really going back to the first 2 books, but if you look at how they defeated each of the 5 dragons, it's really more of a magical, kind of happenstance that they defeat the 5 dragons rather than actions of their own. So you've got the black dragon first. It's defeated when they hit it with the blue crystal staff. You've got the red dragon, who's defeated by the older matron red dragon. You've got the white dragon, which takes an arrow wound and flies off. The blue dragons are defeated by the dragon orb when Lorana takes control of it, which here again, Lorana taking control of the dragon orb, even with the instructions that Tasselhoff found, I found that sequence to be unbelievable as well. I mean, really, you're in the middle of battle. You've never done anything like this. And Raistlin, mind you, battles with it, with his dragon orb. Whereas Lorana just puts her hand on it and it works for her. Mm-hmm. And then the green dragon is also managed with the dragon orb when Raistlin takes control of it. Mm-hmm. So you've got, and here again, part of the problem is this is Dungeons and Dragons, and our party is like 3rd or 4th level, and they're battling, mature dragons. They need to be like 12 or 13th level in order to battle these dragons. And so you've got this kind of disconnect between dragons that are too high for their level, but, you need those dragons to be that high of level, because otherwise, nobody's going to be impressed with them killing a baby dragon.
That's actually a very good point that never even crossed my mind. From because you are correct. Dragons do not appear at low level. Like maybe if it was a worm, but or a wyvern, excuse me. I could understand a wyvern, but like high dragons are not something to be trifled with. If you are a low level character in D&D and you come across a high dragon, you run away and hope you survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't mind Lorana using the dragon orb because it did really affect her, but also like when you're really, really desperate, like you can do amazing things. You know, it's like the stories where like mothers lift cars off of children and like things like that. You know, like sometimes desperation can make you unheard of strong, right? But yeah, John, I think this just falls into the trope that I hear like non-fantasy readers criticize fantasy for, where like the big moment, there's always just like some magical object, or like, you know, there's just like a little trick that somebody puts together and then all of a sudden everything is solved. And so in a way, even with everything the characters are going through, it's like there just always is an easy, but there's always like a solution, right? That just sort of fixes the dragon problem. And so I think it does sort of fall into that weakness a little bit, this whole series.
And that's a lot of older fantasy in general. And that's it's why, you know, the tropes are there. And that's kind of the thing too, is if you look at this and compare it to modern fantasy, it really is going to seem like it aged much worse because it does some of those things. But like there are definitely many worse examples, like the Belgariad by David Eddings is 10 times worse than any flaw that this series has, in my opinion, because it does all of the things. Some of it does on purpose, but it's just like if you look at a lot of older fantasy, it's still relying on the tropes, and that's what was popular. People wanted to read tropey, pulpy fantasy. That's what fantasy, a lot of it, not all of it, because there's stuff even in the 80s and before that was very different. But a lot of it was that. And so I think looking at it as a product of its time, knowing that this is it's, I know it's D&D based, and like you guys will bring up real life D&D like interactions, but I don't ever really think about that when I'm reading it. So that's the thing too, is it's based on D&D. You're going to have the things save the day, or the dungeon master pushes you a certain direction, that sort of thing. So it's just kind of like knowing what you're getting into. I still think this is pretty solid, and it's enjoyable, and it has a lot of things I like. It's just kind of like you have to realize what it is and be aware of that's what you're going to get. It's going to be tropey. There are going to be some things that don't make the most sense, but it's just you're along for the ride.
Yeah, so that kind of we can start heading towards wrap up, and one of the things I want to touch on that is I kind of want to hear your guys' thoughts on who you would recommend this series for, and or do you plan on continuing, and what your future plans are for the Dragonlance IP overall.
What's Dragonlance IP?
Intellectual property.
Intellectual property. Okay.
That was a weird way to say it, Andrew. I knew what you meant.
Well, it is kind of an umbrella where it is handled by a bunch of different authors, like Forgotten Realms. So I wouldn't call it a series if it's written by multiple authors.
It's a saga.
Is it a saga? Like it's 140 books, bro.
It's a bunch of
I'm pretty sure the definition of saga is that it's an extremely long, ongoing story. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Weiss and Hickman have written a good series of books, so just their contribution to Dragonlance, not going beyond or into the other books. But as far like I said earlier, I am in the middle of Dragonlance Preludes. I'm in the 4th one, so I'll be continuing reading that. Beth Ann and I have talked about reading Lost Chronicles, because like I said, I've not read those yet. Okay. I've not read Second Generation or Dragons of Summer Flame yet, so I'd like to get to those as well. I do recommend people read, if you've read Chronicles, read Legends, because I started reading Dragonlance Legends this time last year, and that series is much better than Chronicles. It narrows the focus to only a handful of characters, and you really get to explore those character interactions a lot better. So, and who would I recommend it to? I would recommend it to teenagers, because this is, you know, this is pretty clean as far as content. They're not going to notice a lot of the flaws that I noticed, you know, on my most previous two read throughs. Because, you know, I read this when I was 18 the first time, and I don't really remember a lot of the objections that I have to it now. Now, here again, I read it 10 years later, and I remembered very little of the plot of the Chronicles when I reread it. So, you know, here again, and it was a long time before I read Beyond the Chronicles. The Chronicles did not inspire me when I was 18 to pick up the other books in the series.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you would recommend it because I also wouldn't classify this as YA. I don't think it's quite YA because of boot kink. But yeah.
Well, the boot scenes are just that. They're boot scenes. They're implied. They're not explicit.
Yeah, it is implied, but
Yeah.
I don't think, mainly because YA wasn't really a thing when these were written. There was no real, if I remember correctly, there was no real YA genre. That's very much a thing of the aughts. And
Right. Well,
so
I was a YA during the 80s, so yes, there was no YA during the 80s.
right. I wasn't born in the 80s. But,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was born 1990, right on the line. But it is very much like it's classic fantasy. It's in the vein of Lord of the Rings, but it's not as good as Lord of the Rings. Like, I'm not trying to compare the two, but it's written in a style of it. It was just fantasy that was written to be fantasy. That's all it is. It's not adult. It's not epic. It just is. And so I would also recommend it for younger readers, for somebody who's looking for just something that kind of moves the plot along, with some characters that you can get a couple chuckles at or get enraged by, depending on who the reader is. Looking at you, Pete. Or, you know, it is a great series because I've read around 30 Dragonlance books. I read a lot of this when I was a teenager. So I've read The War of the Souls. I've read Second Generation. I've read the Sextant Chronicles. I've read a couple of the preludes. I think Legends is Time of the Twins, correct, John?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's twins. It's Time of the Twins, War of the Twins, Test of the Twins.
Yeah, it's a fantastic trilogy. You have 2 of the 3?
I just recently got 2 of those, yeah.
And I think I've read a couple of the Lost Chronicles as well. And I've also read the Brothers duology. So I've got a fair bit of Dragonlance experience, and I don't regret reading the series as a younger individual.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think younger readers, this would probably be good for, just kind of trying out fantasy. And granted, I was like 10 or 11 when I read this for the first time because I got it from my public library, the individual books. And I read a bunch of others, I think, too, over time. But I don't remember most of it. But I think for younger readers, it's good, or just those who have an interest in kind of going back and seeing some of the origins of some fantasy, of people who are interested in that. Because despite having a much more negative opinion of the Dragonlance Chronicles than I did before, I still am really interested to continue more of the novels, because I like the characters. There's a lot of questions, and it's just, I do think it'd be interesting to explore the world more. And I do enjoy a lot of what's built up. So despite the flaws of this, I think it does accomplish what it wanted, which is kind of starting this big overarching series where not only can we look at the past of these characters, the stuff that happened during these books, the distant past, their descendants. Like, there's so much that can be looked at. And so I'm still really interested. I'm not prioritizing it by any means, but I definitely do. I've had some for years, and I recently got a few more just because I've been interested in some specific stories from the Lost Chronicles, from the preludes and the legends. And so I do think there's some good here. So we're all, you know, pointing out a lot of probably objectively bad things about the series, but, you know, we're all people who read a lot and review books on the internet. And so, you know, it's one of these things. I think this would be, if I read more of the books, I don't think I would review them. I think I would just read them for fun.
Yeah. Bethan, Pete, final thoughts?
Yeah, let's see. You'd had some questions. So yeah, just agreeing with everybody else. I read these books for the first time, I think when I was like 13 and 14, so like 8th and ninth grade. And I think that was really perfect timing for me. I mean, it sort of opened my whole world to like commercial fantasy. I mean, before that I had read, like I basically read The Lord of the Rings in one summer and then discovered this trilogy like that school year, essentially. And so it was like sort of two extremes, right? And so that was just, yeah, that was just great and started a lifelong love of fantasy. So I think that was good timing. And I think like the writing is good, I think, for teenagers because the plot moves so quickly. I think even though there are some adult themes, a lot of them are more read between the lines pieces. And then I think a lot of the like emotional shortcuts with the characters that Weiss and Hickman take are like honestly more appropriate for teenagers, whereas adults were like, I don't know about this, but yeah. So I think that was good timing. And John already mentioned some tentative future reading plans that we have. I've read a lot of Dragonlance books, but like very piecemeal, just as I found them in used bookstores. So I've read like bits from like all these different series within the world. And I would love like over the next 10 years or so to sort of fill in the gaps. And I don't know that I necessarily need to read absolutely everything in Dragonlance, but I would like to have at least reread or read all of the main series that are sort of the backbone of it.
I think there's some new books that either just came out or are coming out.
Yeah. Oh, I might have a child. Hi. Okay, I might have to sign off. So I'll just say thanks for organizing, Andrew, and I might duck out and let you all keep chatting if that's okay.
Not a problem. We're getting ready to wrap up as soon as we get Pete's thoughts.
Cool.
Final thoughts.
My final thoughts.
Bye, Beth.
Bye. I think so. Coming at this, I think this is definitely a introductory series to fantasy. It's great because it shows some of the direct influences of RPGs on fantasy, which another booktuber, AP Canavan, he did his thesis on, I think it was his master's thesis. I could be wrong. It was basically on influences besides Lord of the Rings on fantasy. And I think you can separate the Lord of the Rings / mythology influences and the RPG influences of fantasy. So I agree with him there. And this is an excellent way to see the direct influences of fantasy. I would say because of some of the more adult elements that maybe later, just because of like the boot stuff and then the waterfall scene in Winter Night, like there's some stuff that I would say is more, you want to be maybe 16 or 17 at the least before you start reading these. As an introduction to fantasy, but like if you've already had a good introduction to fantasy, it's like hit or miss. Like it's not something that like you need to read if you want to read fantasy, in my opinion. As for future reading plans, I really don't have any. I have Dragons of Summer Flame, so I might be persuaded to read that, but I didn't form any significant attachment to the world through this series. So it's definitely, if I were to read more, it's very, very low on the priorities for when I have a lot of other series that I really want to read.
Well, that is totally fair. If it didn't click for you, and a lot of us read it as when we were younger, and so I think nostalgia also helps a lot when you start getting a bit older, because you can kind of go, oh, I remember how this made me feel. It irks me now, but I used to love it. But I just got to say, I appreciate all of you for showing up. I was happy to host the final live show for the Chronicles. So if we do continue, it will probably be at a later date and time. I'm probably next one on somebody else's channel if we continue. But I just wanted to say that thank you all for showing up. And if all of the viewers or any viewers have made it to this point, I should have mentioned this earlier. I do have everybody's channels linked in the description down below. You should definitely check them out. They're all fantastic creators. That said, guys, like I think we've pretty much picked the book apart, and it's time to sign off. So until next time, guys.
All right.
Peace
Thanks
out.
for hosting.
Thank you very much.
Bye.